Welcome to the Brandy Show, Conversations with. The idea for this type of show came from the very concept of podcasts. They're available to anyone at any time since they stay posted on the internet portal indefinitely. Podcasts that are time sensitive, that deal with issues of the day are fine, but after a month or so, they can be out of date. Taking advantage of the technology, it made sense to me to create a program podcast that would last. It's as current the day it is posted to 6 months or a year from now. So I hope you like our series Conversations with. Thanks for stopping by. Today's conversation is with Andrea Fischer Newman. For more than 2 decades, Andrea served the University of Michigan on their Board of Regents. She lost her bid for a 4th term in November of 2018, but that does not diminish her immense impact on Michigan. She was instrumental in the direction of U of M during an unprecedented era of growth, during a changing landscape of higher education. Besides that part of her resume, Andrea has worked with U.S. presidents and has had a unique perspective on the role of athletics and education at one of the most visible and highly respected universities in the land. Have fun. This is my conversation with Andrea Fischer Newman. For the first time in over 2 decades, you're no longer a regent at the University of Michigan. How is life after Regency?
This is what you want to remind me of as we start this podcast?
I want to get the bad stuff. No, I want to get the bad stuff out of there first. Then we can get to the good stuff.
It's fine. I mean, it was, it's a little weird not knowing everything that's going on all the time, but it's absolutely wonderful. I mean, I love the university. I enjoy going to the events. I enjoy living in Ann Arbor, and I get to take full advantage of everything everyone else does.
You're amazing, okay? And I don't mean to blow smoke up your skirt
Then
here,
don't.
but no. When this whole thing went down and last November it didn't work, I was texting you saying, you're in at 11 o'clock at night. You remember? You're in. You're 100, 200,000 votes ahead.
Except you failed to read the Wayne County votes because they weren't in yet.
I know, but I still thought even with that, it wasn't going to happen. And you kept telling me, no, I don't think it looks real good. And I'm going, what is she looking at? To me, it's amazing that you're in this game, that you know that before it happens. How did you know?
Because I know where to look for the votes, and I know which areas of Michigan are more inclined to vote Republican, and I saw what was happening around the state. And we knew going in that it was going to be a very, very bad year for Republicans, and especially statewide Republicans. It's an off-election year in terms of a presidential election. The clock usually swings the other way in those years, and it has traditionally. I went for it. It didn't work out, but it was an amazing 24 years. I loved every minute of it, and I love my life now.
It's hard for me. It's hard for me to believe sometimes, because you know the old saying, politics is all local. And yet you were telling us when this thing was going forward that the Trump candidacy and the vision of what was going on in the country would affect you. And I kept thinking, that goes against that age-old wisdom that elections are all local.
So elections are local, and this was a Michigan election because it was statewide. And Trump's approval ratings were way down. A lot of people, were upset and concerned about the way Michigan went in 2016. People pay more attention to a president than they might to a candidate, and we're unhappy with the direction. And that reflects itself in voting in this state and in most states. And so, based on the polling and based on what we saw leading up to the election and based on the fact that Trump's popularity was, way down in this state, it wasn't unexpected.
So 24 years on the board of Regents, and if you had to look back at it, what's Andrea Fischer Newman's legacy for what you did? I mean, and the thing is, this is not something you can do in like 2 sentences. You've had tremendous impact over more than 2 decades. But if you wanted to give us highlights of what you're proud of, what would they be?
I think I'm proud of the very, very strong fiscal shape that the university is in. Our endowment, our development, the expansion of the school, the increase in size of the school, the stellar faculty, the increase in the number of applications to the school, the fact that Michigan has grown, prospered, and positioned to even do better in the years ahead is what I'm most proud of.
Why were you the only one to vote against raising tuition? That seems to be that issue that I'm on your side there, and yet, 8 other regents voted for an increase in tuition?
It was different on different years. For many years, I was the lone vote against increasing tuition. In other years, a colleague or two would join me, but we never reached a majority in order to hold back the tuition increases. And to this day, I believe we did not have to raise tuition the way we did. I've been through the numbers. I know the numbers. And there are other decisions that could have been made to keep costs more reasonable or lower than they are today. That said, for an in-state student, the argument is that Michigan's a pretty good deal considering the top-tier school that it is and considering what students from OutState pay. I would argue that Michigan taxpayers help subsidize the in-state students, and we should do our best to make it even more affordable for all in-state students.
We've had conversations about this. In-state students are wonderful and all that, but out-of-state students pretty much have no chance.
No, 50% of the incoming class is an out-state student. It's about 50-50. But here's what's happened. And people say you're taking more out-state students. The bottom line is we've raised the number of students we take. So Michigan's incoming freshman class is usually between 6,500 and 6,800. When I started on the board, it was around 2,500. And so the number of students coming to Michigan has increased, but the number of in-state students has actually gone up, not down. So,
and what about that issue of a number, like a $65,000 income? Okay, below that, you get in for free, or above that, you don't. You voted against that, having that threshold,
I voted against
didn't you?
it. Yeah, I voted against it because we're pretty much already doing it, and I thought it was more of a marketing campaign. And of course, if your family income is below, family, mother and father, you included, is below $65,000 a year, then your tuition is going to be covered. You're going to qualify for everything. That's the median line in Michigan. What I was concerned about, and the reason I voted against it, is we're not doing anything for the middle class. And so a middle class kid who has two parents working and siblings and other expenses and going to college.
And they're making $80,000. That's middle class. That's not really, that's low middle class.
$100,000 is middle class.
Right. But that's low. That's even low middle class.
That's low middle class. And there is financial aid up to about $120,000, but it goes in a declining scale. So you're really not getting enough that would let you come to the University of Michigan. And my concern was our focus was on the lowest income, where I believed we were already doing what we were now saying out loud we were doing. And we needed to focus more on raising money and having scholarships for the middle class, because that's who's getting squeezed. The wealthy can afford it, and the below 65,000 is now being mostly taken care of. There are issues obviously with other parts of living in Ann Arbor, and so you're leaving out a population of students whose families have worked hard to get them here. I think of it in terms of two Teamsters or two UAW workers who have a child that aspires to go to the university, and if they haven't saved or they haven't done the MET program or one of these things, and they don't have the money, they're not going to qualify for what, if only one parent was working, they would qualify. But the fact that two parents are working to provide a better life for their children and their family, they don't qualify.
It's kind of a shame.
It is.
Overall, is the cost of education too high?
It is. It's a free market in higher education, and it's a free market in Michigan, and you can get different higher education in all types of places, whether it's a community college, a directional college, as I like to call them, a state university, a private university, and you can look for financial help in all of these places, but it's just going to continue to grow and get more expensive. There's, if you as you grow and pay more salaries and increase operating costs, it gets more expensive.
Should every kid go to a college, a 4-year deal? I mean, there's a big question about trade schools. There's a big question about higher education. Is the college education necessary for every high school graduate?
You know, I think vocational schools are an absolute necessity, and I think for some people they are the right choice. I think community colleges, I think 2-year degrees, 4-year degrees, 6-year degrees, you almost today need an education in something to get a job. And so if you want to be an airplane mechanic, you need a mechanic's license. You don't necessarily need a 4-year college degree, but you do need an A&P license, which I know you can get at community colleges in Michigan. So there's lots of different ways to have careers in lots of different schools, but all of it costs money.
Are people not taking advantage of that?
No, I think they are. I think one of the things that people haven't noticed in Michigan, though, which is, I think, going to be interesting, we have 15 public universities that are all separately funded by the legislature through an appropriation, and also, tuition and other revenue. Michigan, of course, being the best at that, if you will. The difference is in Michigan, the number of high school graduates is going down. So schools are growing and competing with one another, which makes them more expensive, but yet the student population is declining. So what's going to happen as we look at this out over the long term? Do we actually need as many schools as we have in terms of a 4-year degree? Or would we be better off putting more into community colleges and vocational schools? And that's an answer, I've had conversations with politicians about this over the years. And no one's ever wanted to take it on because different universities are located in different districts and they don't want to take on this politician or that politician. But at the end of the day, Michigan should be looking at ways to spread out the appropriations in a manner that makes sense in terms of higher education, as opposed to just giving out money to everybody.
Okay, let's now take a look historically at your career.
Did I just confuse you?
No, you didn't. No, that's all good stuff, but that was where I wanted to go with the Regents and the education. There's still more stuff later we want to talk about, but now let's go back. You're a graduate of the University of Michigan.
I am.
You're an attorney, and you got into politics, and you served presidents.
I did.
You were hanging out with George H.W. Bush.
Yes, I was.
And George W.
A little bit.
How does it work? I mean, did you aspire to that when you were in college? Or did it just happen?
It just happened. I'd always been one that was really organized and really efficient. And when I graduated from the University of Michigan, I've never told you this story?
Nope.
Graduated from the University of Michigan, I was on an airplane. And back in the day, this was 1980. And I started talking to the man next to me, which should surprise no one that I would talk to a complete stranger sitting next to me.
You would talk to a stuffed animal.
I would. And he had been in Detroit for the doing some prep work for the Republican National Convention, which was in Detroit that summer. And by the end of the plane ride, he offered me a job. And, I gave him my phone number and no idea who he was or anything. And I did what I needed to do that weekend in Washington, flew home. And Sunday night he called and said, report down to the Renaissance Center tomorrow morning and meet with so-and-so and they'll have a job for you. And that's how I got involved in politics.
When you got involved in politics, maybe this is the question that is, what surprised you? And was it a surprise, or were you fully aware of, I guess, what politics is or has become?
Oh boy, when I was in college, I tried to get an internship in Washington, and of course couldn't. I didn't know anyone. My family didn't know anyone. No one in my family had ever been involved in politics, and I had no idea how all this worked. I got a very, very quick education when I started out and discovered most of it was about who you know, your connections, your engagement, your involvement. And I think it shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. I tended to want to think you got there based on merit, but it tended to be that,
Silly you.
Yeah. Some of it's definitely based on merit, but a lot of it's based on connections and who you happen to know and what you do. I mean, one of the things that happened to me when I moved back home in 1988, one of the first people that called that reached out to me was John Engler. He was in the state Senate. I didn't even know Michigan had a legislature. I wasn't sure. Had never been to Lansing. And he mentioned he was going to run for governor, and like most people, I thought he was crazy. But as a good friend would, I helped him. And when he became governor, no one was more surprised than me. Well, maybe there were a few. Jim Blanchard might have been surprised.
I was going to say he probably had to think about that for a bit.
And he was grateful for my help. And I got a call one day, appointed me to the Oakland University board. And I said, well, that's wonderful. I was, living in Birmingham and obviously knew where Oakland was, had been there a few times. I said, but no, it's not where I went to school, and my real interest lies with the University of Michigan. He said, well, that's fine, but you have to run for that office. And I went, what? You have to run for office to be a regent? Had never occurred to me. And Michigan is the only state that requires you to run statewide to serve on a university board. And, he schooled me in it, and I started talking to people, and 4 years later was lucky enough to run for the board and be elected. But I spent my first
time out
running for the board. But it was his second term running. He had a very high approval rating at the time, and he won with 64% of the vote, carrying in much of the Republican ticket with him, at least statewide.
Another question, and it'll be the last one probably on politics. What's it like hanging out with presidents? I mean, from us.
I wasn't really hanging out with them.
Well, I know that you're not,
but
but you're in the Oval Office, right?
I have been in the Oval, not on a regular basis.
No, I'm not saying, but for the unwashed masses like me, that's pretty heady stuff. Was it that way for you?
Yeah, it was really heady stuff. It
has to be.
I was really young. I was in my 20s when I did a lot of this, and It made me fearless. It really did, which really leads me to later life.
That's cool. That experience you would characterize as fearless. I love that.
No, it made me fearless because once you've worked in that environment, nothing else intimidates you. Because you walk in every day to work and you're sort of pinching yourself based on where you're working and what you're hearing, because what you're hearing about is what people are reading about and writing about and seeing on television. And it's heady. I mean, but it's also humbling. And it also, when I left there, nothing else ever seemed to intimidate me. That was it. As you know.
I know. No, but that's now a lot of things make sense to me.
Yeah.
From that experience, your work in Washington. But now I'm going to get back to you personally a little bit. You're not only a regent at the University of Michigan, you're a graduate of the University of Michigan, but you're also a mom of a Michigan graduate. What's it like for you as being a regent and shepherding this school to where you think it should go, now having one of your own?
It's I'll tell you what the big difference is. It's amazing what you think you know until you have a kid that's at school, and then you find out everything you didn't know, and your line of questioning changes on, well, I've heard this from a 19-year-old. And there was another regent at the same time had a student in the same class as my son. And he would come in with all these questions, and I knew exactly where they were coming from.
So in many ways, David kind of helped you figure out what was going on, and you could take issues to the regents.
He did. And, well, not just issues, but sometimes you would hear about something at the highest levels, and then when you talk to students, they would look at you like, that's not.
It's like what affects them is different than what you may see come across your desk.
I still remember after the election in 2016, there was a lot of the schools and colleges brought in dogs and Playdough and things to sort of calm the students down, which I thought was kind of ridiculous, but a lot of people felt it wasn't. And I remember asking my son, what they had done at the School of Music, Theater, and Dance, which is where he was enrolled. And he said, oh, yeah, we had the Playdough and the dogs and and they came and it was fun. Just, okay.
And was David's experience something that you said, boy, I'm glad he had that?
Oh, my God, yes.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, oh, my God. He he grew up wanting to go to Michigan, like I think so many kids of alums do. When he got in, it had to have been the happiest day. It was the happiest day of his life, but it was probably one of the happiest days of my life, too. And he loved every minute. He loved it so much that when the opportunity came for him to do time abroad, he said no, because I don't want to miss a minute in Ann Arbor.
That speaks volumes.
He took advantage of everything offered to him and went in a direction totally different than I did. I mean, I was in LS&A. He was in the School of Music, Theater, and Dance. He was an acting major. I was a history major. He got involved in things like Musket and in Basement Arts and in the Alumni Association. He did a development summer internship program. You know, I did none of that. And so he made his own way. He also, you know, enjoyed going to every sporting event on campus. I went to some.
He sat next to me and by the way, in the Frank and Andrea Fischer Newman broadcast booth.
When we gave some money, we wanted to give some money to the new stadium, and when we gave the money, the development people asked us if we wanted to name something, and the only thing I could come up with was the home broadcast booth, which they hadn't even thought of, which they thought was kind of funny, but it's been fun to have my name on your booth.
Oh, Dan and I get the biggest kick when we walk in there, and you're coming in to join us. And David sat next to me for
David,
what, 12 years?
So the rule was with David, he could go to every game and he could sit in the broadcast booth and listen if he didn't bring a friend. If he brought a friend, he had to sit in the seats like everybody else. I don't think he ever brought a friend, but I also think since his father is English and didn't grow up with football, that's how David learned football, was by listening to you guys and to watching the field.
Well, I think that I can tell people personally that he was my backup color announcer for about 10 years. But speaking of athletics, as a Regent, and this is where I want to go with you because you have had such a diverse career, but again, nothing intimidates you. But Bo Schembechler, when you first ran into him, there was an intimidation factor he tried to lay on you, right?
Oh, he did. So I joined Northwest Airlines in 1994. And one of the pieces of my portfolio, since I was the only person from the legal department in Detroit, somehow became our sponsorships. And I was going through them all. And along the way, somebody on the operating team who was clearly in awe of Coach Schembechler, had agreed to give him a significantly large number of first-class tickets to fly people in for the Millie Schembechler tournament, and basically eating the entire Detroit budget with these tickets. And so as I was going through things and, you know, being logical about what we should be sponsoring and not sponsoring and whatever, I saw this large outlay and realized that it would be good if we, you know, had at least some people playing in the tournament or doing something.
Yeah, something for our dollar, right?
You're giving it because it's charitable, but at the same time, obviously companies look for recognition and look to participate in some way. And so I called to make an appointment with Bo. I called to make an appointment with the tournament director is what I did, so I could go talk to someone.
Bo was the tournament director. He was the food and beverage guy. He was the guy that got the golf clubs.
So it turned out it was Bo, and I made an appointment, and he told me to meet him at Schembechler Hall, or they told me to meet him at Schembechler Hall. So I was scared to death. I called my father and I said, I'm going to meet Bo Schembechler. And my dad, should I come? Do you want me to come? I'm like, no, I got to do this. So I get down there, and he's in that, you know, that office across from the head, and I had never been in Schembechler Hall, you know, and I go in, and he's sitting there at that desk, and I sat down. He had somebody, I want to say maybe Jerry Hanlon was there too. Somebody was there, and I sat down, and, you know, he crossed his arms and sat back and said, so what do you want, you know, kind of thing. And I said, well, and I kind of went through the problem with these tickets and the fact that you know, nobody from Northwest or any of our customers were playing in the tournament. And he said, well, you got to force them in the practice round. And I said, well, that's not good enough. I said, we need a couple of foursomes in the main tournament. And he says, well, I can't do that. I don't have any left. And, he just said, that's not going to happen. And I looked at him and I said, well, I guess you're not going to get any tickets. And he just exploded. It came out of me naturally. I wasn't even thinking about it. It was just having a discussion. He said, you are the toughest broad I have ever met. And then he said, okay. It was just like that. And then he started laughing. And that was that.
You learned the secret.
I didn't know what I learned. But
No. If he can bulldoze you, he will. But if you stand up, there's a certain amount of respect.
I wasn't really
there.
standing. I was crouched in a corner.
I know. But you had to call on something from down in there to say, okay, you don't get your tickets, and you knew that wasn't going to be received well.
And then when the tournament came around, of course, he wanted me there, so I came and he introduced me to Kat, and he said, and he told her the same thing. He said, Kat, this is the toughest lady you're ever going to meet.
and the thing is, later you guys became buddies.
Yeah, we became really good friends. He was wonderful, but that was the beginning.
Talking about athletics, the Regents are involved, and you are involved. How important is athletics to a university?
So here's the deal on athletics. When everything is going well, it is a tremendous asset to the university. It's not a big budget compared to the overall budget of the institution, but when things go bad, it reflects on the entire reputation of the institution. So it's very, very important that you have the right people running the athletic department, that you have the right process and controls in place, and that you run a program completely above board.
And this is not something that the Regents just kind of said, okay, athletics, you go off on your own. You're involved in that.
We're involved from an oversight perspective. The Regents do not get involved in the hiring and firing of coaches. The president hires the athletic director, usually in consultation with the Regents, once the president has made a decision or is close to a decision. The Regents are concerned about something, risk management in the athletic department, anything that would, be bad or that could lead to a reputational hit on the university or a financial hit. I mean, when you think about the size of the budget of the athletic compared to say the hospital, there's no comparison. Yet the athletic department carries much more weight from a reputational side.
And you were involved in the change from Lloyd to Rich to Brady and then to Jim Harbaugh. It was on your watch a little bit. So when you say, we're there for oversight, you're also there, I think, for some advice and direction.
Not on football coaches.
No. So let's ask that question. How important is hiring a football coach?
As you mention all these different coaches we've had, and I was also involved in the move from Bo to Gary Moeller.
Yes. And
Gary Moeller's departure and Lloyd's employment, and then from, as you say, and as we were discussing the other day, there are lots of stories not ready for prime time from those years.
But as a Regent, you've had clearly experience with hiring coaches.
I've had clearly experience in understanding the machinations of what goes on behind the scenes.
You're a great politician. Why didn't you get a diplomat job somewhere? You could
have about that for a while. Foreign service appealed to me.
I bet that's true. So during that period of time, I mean, you've got to be watchful as a Regent about what's going on. Was that a tough time to watch things going up and down and not being done publicly? Because we got some heat for that in the media.
I think things could have been done better, a lot better in a couple of those searches. There were clearly, I've never seen more outside involvement than I have in a football coach search from all the, not only just alumni, but from former players and people interested. The first one that went to Rich Rodriguez went on for far too long. With too much engagement from too many people or a lot of people. The next one, we all know the stories about the next one. I have nothing but respect for Brady Hoke. I think he is a class act. He was a gentleman. He worked hard when he was here. Clearly, it did not go the way he would have liked it to have gone. Jim Hackett was the right man at the right time for this university, came in as an interim, put the football program back on track to where, people were excited again and happy about the change.
You talked about, you're right about that, but you said something in there about things didn't go as the way they wanted to go. And
the way
you
Brady
have
wanted them.
The way Brady wanted them to go. You and I have a mutual friend who was an athletic director.
Yeah, very good
And
friend.
really didn't last as long as I think he wanted to be, and kind of things didn't go the way he wanted them to go. Yeah, he made mistakes, but he was always, in my opinion, interested in what was in the best interest of the University of Michigan. That guy's name was Dave Brandon.
Yep.
And I don't think Dave got the kind of treatment maybe on his way here or on the way out as he should have gotten.
I agree with you. Dave Brandon is responsible for many of the improvements in many of the sports, at almost every sport at this university. Without his leadership, we wouldn't have the stadium. Without his leadership, we certainly would not have had the South Athletic Campus. We wouldn't have most of the improvements that we have in the Glick Fieldhouse and the football program and other places. He spent the 4 years he was athletic director making Michigan great. And devoting time and energy to raising money and hiring coaches and bringing in people that he felt would reflect the values of Michigan and do a great job for Michigan.
Maybe this is too simplistic, but what went wrong there?
What went wrong there? You might catch me speechless on this one. I think that there were opportunities to do better in certain aspects of interrelationships on the campus, and I think including the fact that some things didn't go exactly as hoped. There were some changes that were made without buy-in from campus groups. There were some emails.
Yeah. And he lost the PR battle.
But he devoted himself. He devoted his family. He made changes for the better. I think one of my biggest disappointments, and I reflect this to other people, is that when we dedicated the South Athletic Campus, he wasn't there. He was responsible for the vision of the South Athletic Campus and for raising the money for it.
Right, and he was responsible for the entire baseball complex too, for the most part.
He was.
Okay.
And he's a wonderful man that should not be that should be cheered and revered as opposed to derided.
Couldn't agree more. And thank you for going there. Last couple of areas I want to go. There's this constant talk, and you're involved in the economics of higher education, the economics of athletics. People out there talking about paying athletics, paying athletes, and
I'm not one of those people.
Tell me what your philosophical problem with it is.
Yeah. So here's the issue in a nutshell, which for me I never can do anything in a nutshell. But anyway, you're
telling somebody who already knows that.
Yeah. The problem with it is all athletes that are here on scholarship are already getting, in a sense, paid. They're getting a full room, books, board, and tuition. So at this point in time, you're looking at, over 4 years, about $200,000. They're also getting money for expenses in addition to room, books, board, and tuition. And they are getting a great education to take them further. If you start paying student athletes, you can't just pay football players and you can't just pay basketball players. You got to pay them all. Michigan has 996, somewhere around there, just under 1,000 student athletes. So that's one issue, the money to pay for it all. Second of all, if schools are given the green light to pay, there are many, many schools out there. In fact, over 90% of the schools that lose money on athletics. More than that, actually. And if you add on top of the fact that they have athletics, that they have to start paying athletes, then they're not going to have these programs. And so kids that might not qualify for a top, D1 school to go be an athlete might end up not going to school at all because the school doesn't have the money to run the program, and therefore the kid doesn't get the education because he or she couldn't go there and play sports. So I think it's unnecessary because student athletes are already, in a sense, being paid by getting a free education. And if you lop on top of this paying athletes, you will end up shutting down many, many programs, and other kids won't have the opportunity to get that education, which they need more than the guy or girl that's going to go pro, because they don't get the college education. We're never planning to go pro, but if they can play, then they can go to school. Does that make sense?
It does. And I agree completely with you, but I'm going to throw a devil's advocate at you. There are those out there, especially in the major sports like football and basketball, say, we create vast amounts of income for the university. Why is the university basically on our backs walking to that, financial Wizard of Oz territory, and we're getting nothing? So
you're operating in a market, obviously, and the money created by winning teams. This is a not-for-profit venture. The money created by winning teams or not winning teams is plowed back into the operation of athletics. So, yeah, football funds many of the athletic teams at the University of Michigan. Do we want to just have football and cut out everything else that doesn't make money? Does that make sense? So the argument is actually very selfish. I'm a star, I made you money, you should pay me. And these other 800 kids that are at Michigan, they don't need to be here. And so education should be for everybody. And education should be something you want, not just to play football or basketball, but because you're furthering your education. We are an academic school first, and a football school or basketball school or a rowing team school second.
In the news recently, again, going to education, you've gotten celebrities basically charged.
Well, not just celebrities. Some people we have never heard of.
Some people we've never heard of. But the big news, obviously, was celebrities who are in entertainment paying colleges to get their kids into school.
Yeah, it's awful.
They
weren't paying colleges.
First, no, they were paying coaches, and they're paying somehow.
They were paying a make-believe charity. Somebody made up a 501c3 that wasn't a 501c3, and then took that money and gave it to coaches to get their kids admitted to
Andrea, though, how does this happen? Where does this start?
Lack of control. I mean, the thing that blew my mind was USC, the associate athletic director involved. And USC is a rich athletic program, and I assume is paying their administrators and their coaches, and if they're not, then the coaches ought to be looking elsewhere. It is a free market, but it doesn't matter. I mean, they broke laws. Everybody broke laws. Fraud, money laundering, whatever. You can go through the litany of charges, but it's lack of control. In a one-off case where you had, was it the sailing coach at Stanford?
Right.
Probably harder to manage something like that. But USC had so many coaches involved and people inside the administration. You just have to wonder, what the controls were like. I know at Michigan, it would be, there are eyes and ears all over recruiting and who the recruits are. And, the admissions department is different than the athletic department, obviously, and the scrutiny that goes on there. I mean, I've heard coaches complain more they can't get kids in than they can. And they can't. I mean, everything is looked at. And, if a kid, they would know. I mean, I just can't. I'm glad it didn't happen here. I can't imagine it would happen here.
In all your years in education, did you ever think you'd see something like this?
No, I couldn't even imagine it. You couldn't even imagine it. It's lack of control. And I wonder if the NCAA will look at that on a lack of institution. That's a big violation under the NCAA, lack of institutional control.
Speaking of the NCAA, do you think it survives?
Yes, it should. It needs to. Yeah, it absolutely needs to.
Does it need to change?
I think that there's review and reform that can always take place in any organization. I think the NCAA is particularly unwieldy, but I think that it's a necessary organization.
I think that's what you ought to do next.
Right.
Be the president of the NCAA.
Right. Okay, I'm gonna go live on my boat.
I might come visit you too.
I hope so.
Yeah. So, anything else you want to talk about? Anything else that we didn't cover? We didn't talk about?
I think there's a lot of issues coming. Issues regarding higher education change on a rapid basis, and they're all interesting. But I think probably the biggest issue ahead is how we price ourselves out of higher education.
That's where I was going to go next. The biggest problem you see going forward in the future.
Cost.
I couldn't agree more.
Cost. And a mentality by, and a general mentality from people running these institutions that raising tuition is an okay thing to do. Now, granted, many of the institutions are doing what they can to raise money to offset the cost, but it's going to continue to grow, and if you don't qualify for that money, you're going to just pay more and more. And having had one child who decided to go to the two most expensive institutes of higher education in this country, even I know how painful that can be.
I can't tell you.
And Michigan was not one of them.
I can't tell you how much fun this has been.
For me, too.
Thank you, Andrea.
I love talking to you.
I love talking to you, too.
Anytime.
And this is the first time we've talked about, Regent stuff. We normally talk about football and food.
Yeah, and we're good at food. Thanks for having me.
Hope you enjoyed my conversation with Andy today. She's a fascinating personality and can converse with you on just about anything. She knows her stuff and is delightful company. I find myself learning more when I'm with her than she learns from me, and that's a big win for me. Thanks for being with us today on Conversations With.